Hi, Lou here to talk about stalemates and how game designers can avoid them. So what is this? A stalemate is a situation where no one is winning the game or even can win the game, or neither is trying to win, but the game hasn't actually ended. It's a kind of limbo. This is obviously a bad situation for a game that a designer must fix. Now, some people think that vague notions of sportsmanship or cheating will prevent these stalemates from happening, but that's not true. In fact, if a game can be legally played in a certain way, someone will play it that way. You can't call it cheating if it's in the rules. You can't call it unsporting if it's legal according to the rules. So doing either of those things is nonsense. You can talk about the spirit of the game, but that too is often nonsense. Who's to say what rules ought to be ignored? Who's to say what the spirit of the game is? Even a designer, after the game is published, shouldn't be able to say what the spirit of the game is. And I have heard of designers who say, that's not how the game was meant to be played. But to me, that's foolishness. If they didn't mean it to be played that way, they should have made sure it couldn't be played that way. What counts is what's in the rules. This is why when I came back from 20 years away from the hobby and people wanted me to make rulings for Britannia, I said, no, you have to go by what's in the rules. Even though in that first edition of Britannia there were a lot of rules I didn't like because they had been changed by mistake, but they'd been changed. Well, here's an example. My game Doomstar, which was published in video form in 2016, has not yet been published in tabletop. Two extremely deliberate and cautious players were playing. Typical games by others had been about 15 minutes and rarely 30 minutes. These two played for 2 hours. For a very long part of that, each had about a half a dozen pieces left, and neither would chance an attack, which made sense from their point of view, pretty much. So I had to make a rule to break this kind of stalemate, which I should have anticipated and had not. The rule involves how many turns go by without a capture, then the more numerous side wins, or if they're equally numerous, the game ends in a draw. And the key here is it ends. It doesn't just keep going on and on. Now, what about negotiation? Some people regard negotiation as unsporting, which strikes me as ridiculous. It's just a matter of persuasion, and it's part of a game. Nonetheless, there are many people who don't like it. There are people who want to play my game Britannia, for example, which is for 4 players, without negotiation. Unfortunately, you can't play multiplayer conflict games without negotiation. Even if you put tape over the players' mouths, which I understand someone did for gunboat diplomacy, which is diplomacy without negotiation, the players can gesture and use meaningful looks to communicate. This reminds me of modern bridge, where big cardboard dividers are placed on the table so that a player is faced with just 1 or 2 places where he can shove a card out and cannot see anyone. And this is designed to prevent people from communicating without words. Well, that kind of communication without words is going to happen over a table if people can see each other. Now, in any game where players can strongly hinder or help one another, there are going to be forms of negotiation and agreements. It can't be prevented. So the best I can do as a designer is prohibit secret negotiation, that is, where the players go off somewhere and talk, because secret negotiation also takes a lot of time. It is the heart of the game diplomacy, but there are very few games that allow secret negotiation because of the time. In general, trying to ban negotiation in the rules is trying to legislate reality. It doesn't work. You cannot legislate attitude in game rules. At best, you can recommend it. So a rule quote, "You must play to win," unquote, not draw or stalemate, is utter nonsense. Rules that cannot be objectively enforced don't work. Who can say someone isn't playing to win? Apart from the fact that many people don't want to play to win for a great variety of reasons. Instead, what you have to do is disallow the tactic or strategy being used to avoid playing to win by changing the rules. That's the designer's responsibility. Another example here is chess. The stalemate rule in chess is designed to cope with repeated positions that can amount to a player playing for a draw. The rule is, in general, if somebody moves so as to create the same position 3 times in a row, they can't do it again. Or they can't do it that time. I don't recall exactly which. So I'd bet that rule was added to chess to avoid a never-ending game, a game that just went back and forth but never ended. Of course, we have to remember many chess matches end in draws, so it's a different situation than a game that isn't otherwise a draw. So the stalemate rule in chess doesn't result in a draw. Rather, it prevents the player from moving repetitively to stalemate, so they have to do something else. Now, I've discussed this online somewhere, and one commenter in December 2017 said, quote, "As a player, one often has to fix imperfect rules. I find I need to do so a whole lot less when socially enforced behavior includes playing to win. Of course, no rule can eliminate this, but the attitude fixes a lot of otherwise broken games virtually effortlessly by a cultural expectation. You either play to win, or if you can't do that, concede the game." Unquote. Again, this is a failure of the designer. The rule should prevent it. Unfortunately, many game designers aren't very good. Not really. And the game is what has to take precedence, not the social behavior of players. Now, if everybody plays that way, then it works out. But if you get a situation where somebody's doing something by the rules and he or she says, "But it's in the rules," then the other players can't prevent that. Or if they do, they're cheating. That's what it amounts to. They're cheating if they prevent that person from playing by the rules. Same commenter. A classic example is DaoQun or Qi. Some say the game is broken because one can, in theory, place animals to guard all 3 of one's own traps and move the rat in the water indefinitely. And when the rat's in the water, I don't believe it can be captured or affected. Doing so will never win the game, but theoretically allows no defeat. By the views I grew up with, a person so doing effectively concedes the game to the opponent because they are giving up on trying to win. To get a draw, one would have to play the game to a state where its rules define a draw. And the rules ought to say that this is a win for the other player if that's what you think should happen. But evidently they don't. Now, what does a designer need to look for to try to make sure that there are not stalemates in his or her game? Well, of course, initially you want to play the game in your mind's eye, looking for potential problems. You want to look for positions or situations that lead to perpetual play, as in the previous example. You want to look for situations that can go on forever if players are cautious, as in Doomstar. And this is true not only first in your mind's eye, but then during playtests. During playtests, imagine how the game could arrive at one of those situations. Use a variety of playtesters, including some who enjoy breaking the game. In other words, people who will look for ways to get around the rules. Those are ideal, but it's not easy to find players like that. I know one who used to test software to see if they could break it, and he'll break games the same way. But it's pretty rare. So the takeaway here is, as a designer, you're responsible for avoiding stalemates. And this is yet another reason why you play test, so you might have some of those stalemate situations come up that you hadn't thought of. Thanks for listening.